John Anthony Naveen is a psychologist who was born on July 5th, 1933. Throughout college, he was studying psychology, and after graduation, he became an assistant professor of psychology at Swarthmore College, and soon after that, he became an associate professor of psychology at Columbia University. He is currently still living today, however, he is retired, so he no longer actively researches or practices. His studies were working with reinforcing pigeon behavior through a series of behavior schedules and reinforcement strategies, and after conducting these experiments, he wrote the behavior momentum theory. The populations that he worked with throughout these studies were mostly pigeons, however, sometimes he did work with humans, and I will explain my findings through these experiments in this presentation. In this slide, you will find a couple of pictures of Anthony Naveen, and the one on the right is the cover of his book, The Behavioral Momentum Theory, which he wrote after conducting all of these experiments with reinforcing behavior. When I was researching Anthony Naveen, some of the articles and resources that I used were peer-reviewed articles, National Library of Medicine, International Association for Behavior Analysis, and then Anthony Naveen's actual written work called The Behavior Momentum Theory. After researching Anthony Naveen's experiments, I found that he worked a lot with pigeons and their behavior. He was working with the pigeons on a reinforcement schedule to see if it impacted the behavior of the pigeons. And as I said before, he did also use this on a couple of human experiments as well, but a majority of his experiments were with pigeons. In these experiments, he used stimuli such as food and keys for the pigeons. The reinforcer was the food, and it was given to the pigeons when they would peck the correct key. Each time that he conducted this experiment, he would change the environment somehow. So either by the amount of pigeons that were used, the amount of keys to choose from, prompting towards the correct key, and the variable intervals used for when the reinforcer was given. In the end, he found that the reinforcer being used, which was food, was considered a power function in this equation. If I ever had the chance to meet Anthony Naveen or speak to him about his experiments, I would have 3 questions for him. My first question being, why were the pigeons the choice of subject for these experiments? Seeing as he wanted to use these behavior strategies on humans, I would just like to know why he chose to work on animals so much instead of humans throughout the experiments. The second one, I would like to know how he chose which alterations to make for each environment during these experiments. So how did you come to the conclusion to use 2 pigeons instead of 5? Or how did you choose how many keys to put out that they were going to choose from? The third question, how often do you still attend or speak at events about your research and literature? Seeing as he is still living, I would just like to see if he ever, speaks to other people and explains his literature or seeks out people that are still using his strategies now. After researching Anthony Naveen's work, I think that his experiments really did impact the clinical practices of behavior analysis that we still use today. I think every single thing that he touched base on and spoke about in these experiments, the reinforcement schedules, changing the environment of the experiment, using different types of reinforcers for different types of situations, I think it all applies to exactly what we're learning in this class and what we do on a daily basis, at least for me. I work in a low incidence classroom in an elementary school, and almost every single student in my classroom displays some sort of behavior on a daily basis that I would use ABA for. And I feel like I'm using a lot of these strategies already in my room that, I didn't even know had a name to. And so I just think that it's really interesting that his work has impacted this field even today, many, many years after he has conducted these experiments. And I think that the research that he came up with will continue to affect behavior.